Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming today. My name is Alissa Heydari. I'm a research professor here at the law school, and I run the Vanderbilt Project on Prosecution Policy, known as VPOP. You can learn more about our work online on our website, and most importantly, through our podcast that we launched. Thank you, Colin. Our podcast that we launched a few months ago called True Bill Talk, available wherever you find your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, and Amazon. Before we get into everything, I just have a bunch of thank yous I need to say because this event required a very massive team effort. So first, I want to thank the Barrett Social Justice Program, Professor Dan Sharfstein and Aaron Park-Ranza for helping put this together. I also want to thank our program coordinators, Quenna Stewart, Alissa Lacey. We've got Colin Nixon, who's always helping us with the tech stuff. And I also want to thank Bianca Sagachi, who's helping us with our live stream today. And I want to thank all of you for being here. Real quick, how many of you are students? All right, how many 1Ls do we have? Mostly 1Ls, 2Ls, 3Ls, and then community members. Awesome. So one thing that the students should know is that there are people from places like the former director of the ACLU of Tennessee is here. We've got Preston Shipp from Fair and Just Prosecution. So this is a great networking opportunity for all of you. And I just want to thank everyone here, both from inside and outside the Vandy community for attending. And I want to thank our panelists. I'm going to introduce them in a minute, but Jared Fishman came in from Canada. He's home away from home. And Ashley Johnson drove in yesterday for St. Louis. I want to thank both of them for coming all this way for a very short 1-hour program. So I want to just kind of frame the conversation. Why are we holding this event? Why are we talking about this book that Jared wrote, Fire on the Levee? I've been here for 2 years now, and I talked to a lot of students about careers and career paths and advice. And the question that I get asked over and over again is, or it's more of a comment, I guess, which is, I have a lot of qualms with the criminal justice program, criminal justice system. I feel that it is oppressive to marginalized communities, and so does it really make sense for me to be a prosecutor if I feel that way? And I always tell people, the answer is yes, and it's because prosecutors hold all the cards. Prosecutors have the ability to dismiss a case. Prosecutors have the ability to make a lenient offer, which is not something that even a judge can do, and certainly not something that a defense attorney can do. And so I think even the former defense attorneys in this room would agree with me that prosecutors hold all the cards. And so I stand by that answer. But another answer that I should probably be including when students ask me this is there is this whole subfield called civil rights prosecution that we don't talk about as much. And the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice in D.C. is probably the most well-known for doing this type of work. They do a lot of different cases, but the ones they're most famous for involve hate crimes and investigations against police misconduct and police crimes. So that brings me to my dear friend Jared Fishman, who made a big move 5 years ago. He left his job at the Department of Justice as a civil rights prosecutor for 14 years to start the Justice Innovation Lab, which we'll talk about today. And he told me that he had written a book called Fire on the Levee. So, of course, I read it. And it's a really amazing book about a specific case and a specific investigation that he did alongside Special Agent Ashley Johnson. But it reveals a lot about our criminal justice system and what it means to do civil rights investigations and civil rights prosecution. So I asked them kindly to please come and talk about the book with all of you. And so they're going to walk us through a really powerful story about a man by the name of Henry Glover. Henry Glover was killed by a New Orleans police officer in the really crazy days after Hurricane Katrina back in 2005. And they also realized that it wasn't just that a police officer murdered Mr. Glover, but many officers within the department went out of their way to cover up this crime. And it's only because of tireless work by journalists and eventually law enforcement through Jared and Ashley's leadership were they able to uncover the truth and bring some measure of justice, or at least try to bring some measure of justice to Mr. Glover and his family. And so let me introduce you to our panelists. So Jared is from Atlanta. Like I said, he was a civil rights prosecutor at DOJ for 14 years and launched the Justice Innovation Lab. We are co-hosting an event here in mid-October that I'd love to tell you about. So if anyone is interested in participating or getting involved some way, please come talk to us after this program. And Ashley grew up in Mobile, Alabama. She has a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, a master's in sociology, a master of social work and public policy and social, you're just collecting degrees apparently. And the thing you got to know about her is that she has done everything. She's done terrorism cases, civil rights cases, of course, cyber, and she is one of only 8 out of 5 special agents in charge of the FBI, meaning that she runs one of the 25 offices within the United States for the FBI. And she's now transitioning to the Office of the Private Sector in D.C. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jared, who brought some nice slides to sort of walk you through the case and give you sort of a big picture of the investigation.
Thank you, Alissa. Thank you, Vanderbilt. It's great to be back in Nashville, especially right around the time of the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. Most of you are too young to remember when Hurricane Katrina hit. And so I want to just start by a little primer on what I think is important to know about Hurricane Katrina and how it impacted this particular case. So on August 29th, 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. And a lot of people tend to think of Hurricane Katrina as a natural disaster, which it was. But at the end of the day, it was most enduring as a human disaster of epic proportions. After the hurricane passed through the city, the levees that protect New Orleans is under sea level, and so the levees that protect the city breached, and 80% of the city filled up with water, sometimes as much as 20 feet, stranding people in their houses, covering up their roofs, and unleashing an inordinate amount of destruction. The part of New Orleans that we'll be talking about is Algiers. So if you look at this top right picture and you see all of that bright color, all of that part of New Orleans is underwater. But where our particular case takes place is in one of the rare parts of New Orleans that didn't flood, called Algiers. And Ashley will tell you how she first learned out about what happened to Henry.
Good morning or good afternoon. As Jared said, thank you all for the invitation. It is a pleasure to come here to discuss this very important case with you all. How I discovered this case, in 2008, I was a new agent in the New Orleans division. I got into the FBI in 2007, so I officially reported. New Orleans was my first office. I officially reported there in April of 2008. In December of that same year, I'm still on probation, still a new agent. The FBI has what we have called complaint duty. So each agent at some point, most new agents under 5 years, if there's someone who calls, or at that time you could actually physically come to the FBI office. I think it's changed some since COVID. But you were able to come to the FBI office and you could submit a complaint. You could say, hey, I have knowledge or evidence of a federal crime that I believe that the FBI should pay attention to, and I would like to speak to an agent. Well, being one of the newer agents there, I was assigned to go downstairs. We received a call that a man was there to give a complaint about a possible stolen vehicle. So I go down to the entryway. I welcome him to the FBI, and I sit with him, and he starts to tell me this story. He comes in, and he's waving this piece of paper, and it's a receipt. It's actually a car title. And he says, who's going to pay for my car? And he's waving it, and I'm very confused, I know I'm new on the job, but I didn't think that the FBI, was into, paying for individuals' cars. I'm like, okay, let's step back. What do you mean he's paying for your car? So he takes me on this story, and he tells me in 2005, the police took his car. So of course I want to understand, well, why did the police take your car? And so he says, well, they took my car, and the next time I saw my car, it was burned on the side of the levee. So he's leaving major holes, right? Because his main concern is he wants restitution for this vehicle. He said he's gone to the New Orleans police, and they haven't given him an answer, and they told him to come to the FBI. So I take him through it. I said, I need you to walk me through exactly what happened on that day. And he says, on that day, on September 2nd, He was riding through the Algiers section of New Orleans, the fourth district where the precinct is. And there was a man who was on the ground who had been hurt. He didn't know how the man had been hurt at the time, but he just said the man had been hurt. And bystanders asked him to help take the man to the hospital because he had a car. He said he couldn't take the man to the hospital because that if you read the history of what happened during that time, there was a bridge called the Gretna Bridge, and that was the access to the other side of the river. And police officers or state troopers had blocked that off. So you could not get to the other side where medical attention may have been available. But this individual, William Tanner, I'll often refer to him as the Good Samaritan. So if I say Good Samaritan, I'm using it simultaneously with Mr. Tanner. That is Mr. Tanner. So Mr. Tanner tells me he picks this man up, can't take him to the hospital. The brother, someone who identified himself as the man's brother, and a friend get into his vehicle with him. So he decides, I'm going to go to this school because I saw police outside of this elementary school a few days prior. So he says they drive to the school and the police drag them out of the car. They assault the man. Then the next time he sees his vehicle is when it's on the other side of the Levee burn. So still a big gap there, right? And then he finally says, and I'm not sure what happened to Mr. Glover. And I said, well, who is Mr. Glover? And he says, well, Mr. Glover is the man that was hurt. He was inside the vehicle when the police drove off. And I presume he was inside the vehicle when the police burned the car. So, of course, I'm thinking this has got to be like cameras and Ashton Kutcher somewhere to say, you've been punked, because this can't be a real story, right? It was so outlandish to me at the time that it could not be real. But as you'll see as we kind of go through the story and what happened and the case and the evidence we captured along the way and the witnesses we developed, you'll see that Mr. Tanner's story that day, that the police ended up, he was hurt because he was shot by the police. So a police officer shot Mr. Glover, and police officers later burned Mr. Glover's body in the back of the vehicle, and police officers later were responsible for obstructing and covering up those crimes.
Now, mind you, by the time Ashley meets Tanner for the first time, it's over 3 years since Hurricane Katrina had hit New Orleans. That is the state of Mr. Tanner's car when we first got assigned this case. I found out about this case because of an article that was published in The Nation by a journalist named A.C. Thompson. A.C. was investigating mysterious deaths after Hurricane Katrina. Over 1,800 people died in the aftermath of the storm. And he met William Tanner along the way and ended up being very intrigued as to what happened to William Tanner. He tried to get to the bottom of things, interviewing some of the civilians who were involved, but the trail ended with this idea that police officers drove off with Mr. Glover, and he suggested that if anyone ever bothers to learn who set fire to Glover, they should start by looking at the police themselves. So I read this article, and turned out that Ashley had an open case, so I called her up, and she said, why don't you come down to New Orleans? We're doing some investigation. So I flew down to New Orleans and began what became an 18-month investigation trying to find out what happened. So what did we learn? Henry Glover and his friend Bernard Calloway were trying to evacuate after Hurricane Katrina hit. They were among New Orleans' poorest of the poor. Henry Glover stole a truck in order to get out of town from a Firestone store. He went to a nearby strip mall to pick up some items some friends had left behind for their evacuation, and he gets shot behind that strip mall. His brother is Edward King, who ultimately responds to the shooting scene, as well as William Tanner, the Good Samaritan, who gets flagged down. So Henry Glover and his family, they live over here. The strip mall is at 3700 de Gaulle, and the elementary school that will come into question is nearby. So Henry picks up the items behind the strip mall, and unbeknownst to him, there were 2 police officers stationed on the second floor of that strip mall, David Warren and Linda Howard. There was a substation of the New Orleans Police Department on the second floor of this mall, and after the storm had hit, breaking glass, they were stationed there to protect the police station. David Warren that day was armed with his personally owned .223 SIG Arms assault rifle. For those of you not familiar with guns, this is a sniper rifle that he had used historically to shoot distances of hundreds of yards. Henry gets shot. Both Bernard and Henry are unaware that there are police officers on this scene. They hear a command, leave now. They begin to run away, at which point David Warren fired his sniper rifle from the second floor balcony, hitting Henry Glover in the back from over 60 feet away. Henry is able to get to this intersection of Texas and Scene, which is right behind the strip mall, at which point his brother, Edward King, flags down William Tanner, the Good Samaritan, and they go seeking help. They go to Paul Havens Elementary School, which was an elementary school that had been taken over by the New Orleans Police Department's Special Operation Division. They're like the SWAT team of New Orleans. And when the other 80% of the city flooded, the SWAT team moved their rescue operation to this elementary school. William Tanner had been in the area the day before and believed that there were medical supplies there, and so that would be the quickest way to get Henry help. But unbeknownst to him, he was met by numerous officers of the Special Operation Team. They pulled William Tanner, Edward King, and Bernard Calloway out of the car, handcuffed them, assaulted the men, and Henry Glover was left in the car bleeding. Ultimately, two officers, Pernella Simmons and Kiala Bell, respond both initially to the shooting scene and to Havens Elementary School. They become key witnesses in our investigation. Now, I start by saying when we began this investigation, we did not know the name of a single police officer who had anything to do with this. A.C. Thompson's article did not identify any of the police officers who were at the school, and there were no police reports that we had identified. But ultimately, we found this picture. This is at the school when the men are being detained, and if you notice over there, that is Officer Greg McRae. One of the things that William Tanner had told us early in our investigation was that the guy who drove off with his car with Henry Glover inside it had road flares. And I will tell you for myself, I did not believe him for a second. I thought it was something he was doing to try to justify or to explain what may have happened to his car and how it got burned. But ultimately, during the course of our investigation, we identified this picture with Greg McRae holding the road flares exactly as William Tanner.
Just interject really quickly for you all to understand these pictures were taken in 2005. So it's before smartphones. There were camera phones, but they were flip phones. So these were pictures that police officers had either kept on their phones for, at this point, 3 or 4 years, or they had printed them off and they had saved them. Or they had, that was the day you went to like CVS where you got pictures actually printed. So we had actually printed copies. So these pictures are from police officers in general and some federal law enforcement officers that had come to New Orleans during this time. The pictures that you're going to see were taken by those individuals, and they saved them. Someone once described this as kind of like an exhibit. People were just sharing pictures. So as you see these pictures, remember that this wasn't us subpoenaing a phone, right, and getting a picture off a smartphone or social media. These are pictures that were actually kept for years by local law enforcement.
In this particular picture, we don't even find until about 4 or 5 months into the investigation, following a lead that led to a lead that led to another lead that eventually led to someone lying about the picture and eventually them telling us the truth and handing over this picture, which became really key because this was the first time we ever actually could confirm who was at the scene at Havens Elementary School. I believe it was 5 months after we started the investigation. Shortly after, the officer with the road flare, Greg McRae, as well as his senior lieutenant named Dwayne Sherman, drives Henry Glover's car to the levee. For those of you who don't know what a levee is, as I mentioned, New Orleans sits under sea level, and so in order to protect the city, they've built these huge walls and mounds that surround the city at various points. This is what the levee looked like in this particular part of Algiers, and set the car on fire. For years, no one knew what happened, or at least no one was talking about it publicly. Ultimately, 18 months later, Ashley and I were able to collect enough evidence along with our colleagues to charge 5 police officers with the murder of Henry Glover, with burning his body, and with the cover-up that followed.
The whole presentation? Okay. I told Jared, I said, you have to keep this to like 5 minutes. And I didn't think he could do it, but he basically did. So thank you. I thought there was going to be more, so I was waiting.
It took 18 months, and I just did it in 5 minutes. So I just want to say that was a pretty good work.
You know, but the book, I have to tell you, for those of you who are really interested in, especially the students in the room, potentially doing investigations in the future, whether on the prosecution side, defense side, plaintiff, civil defense, it's an amazing story about how investigation goes, and it's not always as glamorous as it seems. But yes, the glamorous part is at the end, your result is, in this particular case, 5 charged police officers. I was going to ask Ashley first, this case, and I think most cases against police officers, you can only have them if you have officers cooperating against the defendants, right? The officers who committed the crime. So can you talk a little bit about the dynamics and about the officers who did step forward? And I know there were 3 ultimately, but as concisely as you can, the dynamics of having police officers essentially cooperate against their colleagues.
Thank you. I think that's a very important question, and it's something I always try to stress when I talk about this case. We would not have made this case had it not been for the cooperation of police officers, some voluntarily, some involuntarily, some very hesitant. And we found a lot that were hesitant was out of fear sometimes, or with a perceived loyalty that they had to the department or other individuals within it. Our first break in this case, I believe, was talking to, when I told you about Tanner, the Good Samaritan, coming to the FBI office. He had been instructed to come to the FBI office by one of the deputy chiefs in New Orleans. And after talking to that deputy chief, I was very clear, or I still believe, that he understood that if he got him to come to the FBI, that was a way to get some type of investigation or someone to look at this case. So starting with him, even before we opened the case, we had cooperation from a police officer who understood the magnitude of what had transpired, because he had heard as well the things that, this is a rumor. This is the best well-kept secret in New Orleans for years and years and years, but everyone knew exactly what we were talking about when we started to interview them. The 3 individuals, Linda Howard, who's at the makeshift police, or at the substation that day, Cornelia Simmons and Keala Bell, they were our first 3 key witnesses. They gave us the insight and confirmed a lot of the things that Tanner and other civilian witnesses had told us at that point. And throughout the investigation, I'm not sure how many witnesses we had in total, but I would say, and correct me, at least 60% of them, if not more, were police officers that testified for the prosecution. I had over 300 interview reports. I would say 200 of those, if not more, were of various police officers. As Jared said, we did not have any information going into this. We literally got a roster of every police officer that was assigned to the 4th District during Hurricane Katrina, and we went and talked to each one of them. And each one of them gave us a nugget along the way. Every picture that you see, most of them came from police officers. Even a fire chief from New York happened to be in New Orleans during that time. So sometimes when we see civil rights cases, even though we're investigating police officers, I'm still law enforcement as well. We're still law enforcement as well. So that relationship still has to be maintained. I understand the gravity of how that's perceived. Not everyone agrees with it, if I'm just being honest with you. Not every FBI agent agrees with it. Not every police officer believes that you should be investigating the conduct of police, considering the position that they're in, or they were in at that time, particularly Hurricane Katrina. A lot of police officers have sacrificed their own families. A lot of their own homes have been destroyed. So as an outsider, per se, coming in, questioning their actions or questioning the things that they had chosen to do, it was somewhat could be perceived as insulting to them. But at the end, their cooperation in this case and other cases that derived from the time period of Hurricane Katrina were monumental in us getting justice for not only Henry, but other victims during that time as well.
And Jared, in law school, I think we really teach students about cases. I got to be careful because we've got tenured and tenure-track faculty here who teach things like criminal law and criminal procedure, but we don't really teach students about investigation, again, whether it's criminal or civil. So can you talk a little bit about really just how to be a good investigator and what it takes, and any advice you might have for aspiring litigators who are going to be doing a lot of investigation and not only, legal research and writing.
Yeah, I mean, we turned over every stone. Ashley and I constantly joke that we are nothing if not persistent. I mean, we did interview over 300 people over the course of the investigation. When I wrote the first draft of the book, it was about 200 pages longer, and my publisher says, you're going to have to cut this thing out. Like, you're just going to need to get rid of all the people lying to you. So we cut out about 200 pages of being lied to. He said, like, readers aren't going to be that patient. I said, Ashley and I were that patient. One of the ways that we would often talk about doing a police investigation is we called it peeling the onion, that you start from the outside and you work your way in, particularly in a case like this where we had no idea who knew what. And Ashley said, we got the payroll records. That's where we started. Who got paid during New Orleans, who was a part of the 4th District and who was a part of Special Operations. And we went down that list, initially starting with people who we thought had nothing to do with it. The original allegations when we talked to Edward King and to Bernard Calloway and to William Tanner is that they were assaulted by white officers. That's what we knew. And we also believed that the best way to try to find those people were who was no longer working for NOPD, who might be more likely to break ranks and to tell us. So we started by interviewing black officers who were no longer with NOPD but who were stationed at that time. And in those early months, every single one of those people lied to us. And so we kept going, as Ashley said, step by step, trying to get a nugget here. What is something that we can corroborate that's true? How do we continue to move inside? And slowly by slowly, people would drop us a clue. Sometimes they'd drop us a picture. And we just kept following every lead.
But yes, sure.
From the previous question and what Jared said, it's important when you're looking at these type of cases, and I think why we were successful, it's very important for it to be understood. You're not investigating the department. You're investigating bad actors within that department, if that makes sense, because that's how you get the cooperation as a whole. We're not saying New Orleans Police Department is bad. We're saying there are officers within the department who committed what we believe to be federal crimes. So that distinction and communicating and establishing that rapport, I think, was vital to us being successful in having so many officers cooperate as well.
And Jed, when you say people would slowly drop us a photo, was it under threat of prosecution of some kind, or do you think that some people just had a moment of moral clarity and then decided to maybe help you but not give you the full picture right away?
I mean, the first picture that we got came from an officer who was not assigned to the 4th District. He was not assigned to SOD, but he had taken a picture. He had been at Haven School while Henry's body was still there. And he took a picture of Henry lying face down in the back of Tanner's car with a bright red blood stain in the center of his back. He had given that to one of Ashley's supervisors, who just said, like, you guys need to know about it. Now, that guy did not think we were going to come talk to him. But of course, Ashley and I show up to go talk to him to ask him about the picture and the context behind it and who was there and who was taking it. And that officer never told us the truth. That officer never told us he was driving the car. He gave us some names of people, made us chase down a bunch more leads. But he was not ultimately a witness at trial. And yet that picture became a very key piece of evidence to be able to go to other witnesses and say, all right, was this what you saw when Henry arrived at the school? And people could say, yes, this was Henry's condition at the time that he arrived at the school. Slowly by slowly, people gave us more and more clues, some of whom became witnesses, some of them who did not, all of whom helped paint the picture a little bit more for us.
All right, I have a bunch of other questions. I will save them, though, if the crowd is quiet, which I'm hoping and banking is not going to be the case. So we'll do some Q&A. Any questions from the audience? It'd be great if you could just say your name and what year you are, or if you're from the community, a little bit about yourself. Oh, like one line. Any questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm Claire. I'm a first-year law student here. I'm going to look at the question rather than running around the microphone. Well, I'm just curious about the pictures. Like, since we just went back on that. So the officer that you were talking about, the officer who had taken the photo of Henry Glover's body and then subsequently didn't tell you the truth about, or like he was, trying to cover things up. I'm wondering, why do you think he took the photo? Like, what was sort of the motive behind the photos?
how does that play into like police work? And then if it would end up coming out and not sort of be from this intention of like being super forthcoming. I'm kind of curious about the dynamic.
And I'm going to repeat the question just so everyone can hear. So basically the question is, why do you think these officers would take pictures that could potentially incriminate themselves or their fellow officers?
I'll turn you to Chapter 9 and Fire on the Levee for an in-depth conversation on the importance of photographs in this investigation. I think different people had different reasons. You got to remember that this was a storm of epic proportions. So in addition to the pictures that we saw related directly to this case, we saw lots of pictures of Hurricane Katrina's worst moments, many of which included deceased individuals lying all around the city, covered in various different, sometimes in sheets, sometimes in carpets, sometimes in metal. I mean, I think a lot of people were trying to document what happened because it was such an epic event that people knew was of historic proportions. I think part of it is sometimes we take pictures because we need to remember what we see, but we don't actually want to see it in real time. I think there was a lot of this distancing of trying to like, I need to capture this, but I don't want to experience it in real time. I think we saw a lot of people like that. I think there was people who were documenting crimes. The guy who took that picture he did not testify at trial, so I can only testify as to what I think. He knew something wasn't right. The picture of the three men being detained with the road flare, the officers, he knew something wasn't right. He took a quick snapshot. He was yelled at by the officers, and he didn't take any more pictures. So I think there was a little bit about of that. And then we have pictures in the aftermath. We didn't show you these photographs, but Henry's charred remains are in that car for over 2 weeks before someone gets around to finally collecting it and taking it to the morgue to process it. And so I don't even know how many, probably 50 pictures of Henry's remains in the car in the aftermath. Some people were morbidly curious. To me, it was an apocalyptic tourist attraction. One of the things that was interesting as we found out was how many people knew about the burnt body in the car. Now, many of those people didn't tell us what happened or how they knew what happened, but like people were going to see this thing. We have plenty of pictures that people were documenting. Some of them were NOPD. Some of them were, a lot of out of staters came in the immediate aftermath. So we had fire chiefs, we had people from various different federal agencies who responded. And so the motivations were quite varied.
Great question. Other questions? Yes.
Yes, did the Good Samaritan ever get compensated for his card?
Thank you for bringing us full circle. Ashley, did Mr. Tanner, the Good Samaritan, ever get compensated for his vehicle?
It was part of his restitution. Greg McRae, the person with the road flares, he was convicted later at trial, and part of his sentence was restitution. I don't know if he actually ever paid the money to Mr. Tanner. I believe the city settled with him at some point. But the thing about Mr. Tanner, that car was not paid off. He religiously paid that note every month from September 2005 until April, 2008, until it was paid off, because his insurance told him that he could not claim the car stolen because the police had seized it from him. So that's how diligent he was. And just one thing to follow up, I think it's important to understand, just because you're in law enforcement or whatnot, the officers had gone through a form of their own type of PTSD. And I think a lot of them, in kind of mitigating and understanding what they'd gone through during Hurricane Katrina and what they were expected to do, some of them saw themselves as participants in this crime, even if they didn't participate in the shooting or the actual burning of the car, because they knew a crime had been committed and they had kept silent for a long time. One of the officers, she didn't have a picture, but she kept, I guess you'll see in the book, I'll plug Jared's book, where the family goes to the police station to report Mr. Henry is missing, because they don't know he's right across from the police station burned in a car. And the officer, Kiala Bell, kept that family's phone number for 3 or 4 years. She still had a little piece of paper where they'd written their phone number. So even keeping something like that, knowing years later, and I think hers was guilt. She talked to us about the guilt she'd carried, and I don't think that was just unique to her. I think a lot of officers carried that with them as well.
Jason.
So I have two questions. One, just a basic question. Maybe you said and I missed it, but why did they do this? And the second question I have is, as a result of this, as a result of the prosecution, were there any substantive changes made within the New Orleans Police Department?
Thanks. So question is the motive, you think, for the crime and any resulting change to the office, to the department as a whole, not just, the individual convictions.
I mean, what I will say is the motive, buy the book and read it because it's too complex to actually explain here. The 5 officers that we charged, I think each had slightly different motives, and each of them had different reasons for their involvement in this particular case. I don't know if you want to chime in. You can.
I disagree somewhat. I think the initial motive of the shooting and the burning. Now, why different officers covered up, I think they had their own individual. I think when Mr. Levee was shot, it was simply an us versus them mentality. He was looting, and they had decided that looting was going to be a capital offense. And if you're looting in New Orleans, you deserve to die. If you stayed in New Orleans and you were from certain communities, if you would stay there during Hurricane Katrina, you are seen as the them. And so the shooting, because you'll see if you read that Warren had fired his gun at someone else earlier that day. So Henry Glover didn't have a weapon. It was downstairs, 60 feet away. I believe the true motive was it was that mentality about looting. The same with burning the vehicle. The burning the vehicle may have been dual purposed. I think was again because he constantly told them they were looters when they pulled up, didn't hear their story, didn't attend to or provide medical attention to Henry, but also believed it was a cover-up because some of them knew that a fellow police officer had shot him.
And then results to the resulting change, if any, to the department.
Yeah. So ultimately, 3 officers were convicted of. I did have one more slide up. There we go. So three officers were convicted. 2 were acquitted. The 2 most senior officers were acquitted. But this, as well as other cases that followed, there was another shooting on the Danziger Bridge, in which 2 civilians were killed and others were wounded. There were a number of other shootings at the convention center. I mean, all in all, I think there were 9 or 10 investigations of NOPD in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, some of whom we prosecuted, some of whom we were unable to. But as these stories began surfacing, there was some political will to do something about it. And so there was a large Department of Justice civil investigation looking at patterns and practices in the New Orleans Police Department. Ultimately, the city entered into a consent decree, which led to some really broad reforms of NOPD, the most expensive and most extensive police reform effort, certainly in the history of New Orleans, if not the country. And the New Orleans Police Department is a way better police department today. It still has a long way to go, but it has certainly sparked a lot of changes in training, in use of force standards, in intervention standards. I think one of the most interesting and useful things to come out of this case is New Orleans began a program that was called EPIC. Ethical Policing is Courageous. That's now known as ABLE, Active Bystanders for Law Enforcement. And this idea is that even though the law says that police officers need to intervene when they see another police officer violating civil rights, the reality is they're not actually trained how to stop it. They're not trained in what to do. How do you talk down another fellow officer? Which is why so many people watch this happen and do nothing about it. And this has been a recurring theme in all of my police investigations, is the number of people who didn't actually do anything wrong themselves, but saw something wrong happening and did not intervene to stop it. It's pervasive. And so in the aftermath of this case, New Orleans started a program about how to intervene. They worked with active bystander thinkers, a Holocaust survivor who designed a really impressive curriculum. And now not only are they implementing that to every new officer in New Orleans, but New Orleans police officers are training police officers all around the country. I think they've now trained a few hundred police departments about how to intervene. And I think that's been one of the more important outcomes of this case.
Thanks. In the back, please.
Yeah, I just had one quick question. It was mainly just with so many witnesses going back and lying about things and you having to backtrack, how did you maintain your composure? Like, how did you not get frustrated? I would get frustrated just having to backtrack and, like, think about different things. But, like, also, did you, like, initially know that just something was about the case?
So it's funny. I always tell this story. People would assume, that Jared was, I guess, the bad cop, good cop, bad cop. Um, so I was a social worker before. So I was really at that point. I think interviewing was a strong point that I had. Yeah, there were definitely frustrations. We would have key evidence. We would know for a fact someone had said something or done something, and they would just lie to us. But you have to learn to use that as leverage. And sometimes it would take a lot of our interviews. When I say we had 300, a lot of them were duplicates. And plus, a lot of people went into, when I say duplicates, the same person interviewed several times, and that person also went into grand jury. You have to almost find what in that person can you get them, you know, not to sound heartstringy, but kind of like how do you build a rapport with that person? With the three women, and I talk about them because I believe that they really helped move this case forward. Kiala Bell, when we initially went to her house, the young lady I just told you gave me that phone number from that family, she initially said she knew really nothing. She called me at 11 p.m. that night, and she said, I wanted you to know I lied to you. So as a law enforcement officer, could the prosecution have charged her with 1001 for lying to a federal officer or perjury if they lied into the grand jury? Sure. But you have to learn to kind of leverage those witnesses. But the frustration came more so for me, the officers, particularly that were there on the scene, who continued to cover up and lie repeatedly, even in the face of evidence. But even a lot of those officers in the end, we were able to bring over to testify for the prosecution.
I mean, it was certainly frustrating, and there were a lot of moments. I mean, I remember one night, because one of the ways that I would release at the end of a long day is I would go listen to music. New Orleans has an amazing music scene. On any given night, you can go hear an amazing band, catch them at 7 o'clock, watch a set, and still be back in bed by 9 o'clock and ready for grand jury the next day. So that was often what I did. And one day I remember I was going to hear some music, and Ashley calls me up, and she's like, what's our strategy? Like, we had just been lied to all day. I'm like, Ashley, what do you mean? Like, all we ever do is talk about strategy. And I said, well, we just got to keep going. Like, one day we're going to get there. I think, what was interesting about this case is we were the only people who was going to find this out. New Orleans Police Department did not investigate this case in 2005. By the time they only opened an investigation after Ashley and I opened our investigation. And the person they put in charge of it, his name is Sergeant Detective Gerard Duguay. As you will read in the book, he has a long history of covering up police shootings. So not only were we trying to solve this crime, but NOPD was actively also investigating this crime, but while attempting to cover it up. And so I think for me, I got to this by a slight diversion, but I was never going to be a real lawyer when I was in law school. I worked in war zones. I was really interested in how do we use the law to rebuild systems after war, and I worked in the Middle East. And a friend of mine had been killed by the police, shot in the neck, left to die, and no one was ever held accountable for his death. And so I would constantly think about his family, Seal's family, and the justice they never got. And I saw the same thing in Henry Glover's family. And I think, at the end of the day, it was Ashley and I, and then slowly as we began to get evidence, our team got built, and we had other FBI agents and other prosecutors who joined us on this journey. But we were the only people who cared, and so we had to keep going.
And the frustration, I think, was, you brought up a good point. It was mitigated by, I felt that the Glover family, like, all of their hopes of justice were like laid on my shoulder. Maybe I shouldn't have felt that way, but I did, because I felt as if for years they never got a full story of what happened to their son, their brother. And it was one day we were there, quick story, interviewing Edward King. We were interviewing his mother, Miss Glover, and Edward happened to be there. And so I'm talking to Miss Glover, she's kind of to this side, and Edward's sitting in a chair in a corner, kind of, I can see him out of my left eye, and he's just kind of glaring at me. So in my mind, like, I don't know if he's angry, I don't know if he's, but it's not a pleasant look. And I kind of turned to him and I said, well, Edward, did I ask you one question? Is there something wrong? And he said to me, I can't believe you're here. And I said, well, what do you mean you can't believe that we're here? Jared and I were together. And he says, no one cares about people like us. This happens all the time. I can't believe the FBI is actually going to do something. And that still to this day, and it triggered it when Jared talked about the family, is what really kept me motivated. So when I got personally frustrated with the situation, I really believed that, it was I had been put into this position from the day William Tanner came to the day that I met the Glover family to really try to get to the bottom of it. I couldn't promise them we were going to get convictions, but I could promise them that we were going to make sure that they understood that they mattered in that case.
Just one quick thing I'll say, and then I think we'll do one question. Am I getting in trouble if we go past one? It's fine. I'll get in trouble. I'll say one quick thing in answer to your question about how do you maintain your composure? How do you not, maintaining your composure, that's a personality thing. But I think even if you're not doing civil rights prosecutions, if you're doing any kind of prosecution, and the example that comes to mind for me is domestic violence, like you're going to have victims who lie to your face. Like, yes, I know you have this picture of me with a black eye, and the police came and I told them that this happened, but actually it never happened. He never touched me. Like, you're going to face that a lot. I can't speak to this because I've never been a defense attorney, but I imagine as a defense attorney, you're also going to be lied to repeatedly over and over again. And so I think it requires a level of empathy, of sort of understanding why someone might be reluctant to tell you the truth initially, or why they're going back and forth, whether it's police misconduct or domestic violence or something else. The reason and the context varies. But you kind of have to remember why you're doing this work to begin with, kind of like what Ashley said, I can't believe you're here, which in that sense must have felt great because, nobody has listened to this person or this family seriously, and now someone's able to do something about it. All right, one last question, and then we'll wrap up. And I think our panelists are available to hang out a little bit after, right? So does anybody know who's been holding their hand up the longest? All right. Yes, go ahead.
Kind of piggybacking off the previous question, but especially in the beginning before you had evidence, how did you go about discerning what was a lie? Were there conflicting stories that were being told? How did you navigate the investigation?
Well, this is where having a good cop, bad cop partnership, it's like a buddy comedy, if you will. Now, I mean, the thing that we heard all of the time was, it was Katrina. You have to understand it was Katrina. So that was like, I don't know how many times we heard that, which was used to excuse memory lapses, was used to excuse behavior. And I would say my default was often what they are saying could be true. So I was often saying like, okay, could what they are saying be true? Ashley, on the other hand, even though she was nicer and more social worky and more pleasant, she never believed anyone. So Ashley often started with, no, you're lying to me, and I'm like, we have to prove up your truth. And I think, coming from those two different perspectives actually was a really positive partnership because we would test each other, and she would call out the lies and the inconsistencies, and I would often call out the possibilities. And, in all honesty, Ashley was usually right, but 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 we worked through it.
I would say too, as they teach you like communication, 75% is listening, and so or nonverbal. So on interviews, you usually have a first and a second, and the first person will, they'll ask all the initial questions. I always like to this day being the second person because I like to watch the person's mannerisms. Like, are you saying yes, but your body's saying no? Like, so I look for those incongruencies, and so that was kind of our strategy. Jared would ask the questions, and then I would kind of like understand, okay, I've interviewed this person yesterday. They said something completely different. And I think it is a combination sometimes of how your approach is. We were dealing with, some people some officers from SWAT. So to go in, with this iron fist, you weren't going to scare them into intimidate them physically into saying something. So you had to, my skill, or what I like to do is kind of like find that thing that I could connect with that person on some kind of way, and then use that to leverage almost a relationship with that person, and then get them to understand kind of where we're going and how they could be helpful as well.
Well, thank you. Awesome questions, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists for coming. Let's give them a round of applause.